l'inevitabile vergogna causata al paese dalla disfatta di Caporetto. Oggi possiamo lenire quel dolore, riconquistando le terre cadute sotto il giogo degli invasori asburgici. Prega per me, mamma. Prega per il Regno d'Italia.
Salutations, Snowcap Mountain Snipers. Automatic here for Automatic Games. Thanks for joining me for yet another installment of my Battlefield 1 series. This particular episode, entitled Monte Grappa, will be operating in the vicinity of the Piave River in late 1918, in fact in the closing weeks of the war. Despite being near the Piave, I want to talk about a different river, the Isonzo, which lies north of the Piave. Well, let's get to it.
Orders from General Diaz, soldati. 3 objectives. First, the Church of San Rocco must be taken. After this, we move immediately through La Valle di Sere. Then, with this momentum, we must move on and reclaim the great Forteferro over here.
The Isonzo forms a river basin, 86 miles long, stretching from western Slovenia. That's formerly Yugoslavia, formerly part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and flowing into northeastern Italy. It's a alpine river, and in its valleys you'll find pine and fir trees. You'll also find 7 notable towns, including one called Kobarid. Kobarid is the modern-day name of that town, although I might be mispronouncing it. Nonetheless, in 1918, the name of that town was Caporetto. Now, Caporetto, incidentally, also happens to be an alternate name for the 12th Battle of the Isonzo. And yes, you heard that correct, the 12th Battle of the Isonzo. And the battles of the Isonzo River, there was certainly repetition involved. Generally, Italian offensives kicked off by General Luigi Cadorna. And ultimately, in the end, he'd be replaced. But yeah, this represents beautiful country, torn by war, of course. And the Italian front, it strikes so many as a sideshow to the Western Front or the Eastern Front. But nonetheless, I mean, you don't want to downplay the significance of that front. An estimated 600,000 Italians died there, 400,000 Austrians. And by Austrians, I'm using that as an umbrella term. Certainly that represents so many nationalities. But yeah, you add those numbers together, we're talking an estimated 1 million men killed on the Italian front. But I guess this is going to be the first of the final chapter of my Battlefield 1 videos. Downloadable content notwithstanding, this will just about do it for the vanilla game's content, in so much as we're talking about the campaign mode and the operations mode. But it's I did want to cover, you know, generally everything, and what can I say? We'll be ending it in Italy. Now, the Isonzo River also formed at the time much of the border between the Empire and the Kingdom of Italy. And it was a kingdom. At the time, the reigning king was King Victor Emmanuel. And as I mentioned, Luigi Cadorna was the general in charge of the army. The prime minister was Antonio Salandra, and I want to talk about how Italy got into the war. At the war's onset, you know, in August of 1914, Italy was part of the Triple Alliance. That's the alliance between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. And that was a defensive alliance. It pretty much stated that if any one of those countries were attacked, not by one foreign invader, but by 2 or more, that is to say, by a coalition, this would compel the other 2 members of the alliance to declare war on behalf of the invaded nation, or the wronged nation. However, World War I, it seems to many that it was initiated by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and certainly Germany was seen as an aggressor, and so Italy used this as a justifiable reason to remain staunchly neutral. Strict neutrality is what Antonio Salandra, it's what he espoused. And they pretty much stuck to this, but there were multiple reasons why. And I know that in the Gallipoli video, I said that the Gallipoli operation helped convince Italy to join on the side of the Triple Entente. But that was just a drop in the bucket as to the reasons why they sided with the Allies in the end. Another factor, albeit perhaps a small one, might just be the nature of Italy's relationship with the Central Powers. They are no stranger to fighting with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and in fact they've done battle with the Ottoman Empire in the past. And perhaps that plays into their disposition towards the combatants in World War I. However, that would be overshadowed by economic factors. Take for instance trade. Italy is largely an agricultural society in the leading up to the First World War. They're highly dependent on foreign trade, namely steel and coal, and primarily Britain and France. And in fact, it's not just that. Surprisingly, despite being an agricultural society, one of their largest imports is grain. And the duties imposed on this grain, incidentally, I mean, it kind of, well, one would imagine that it would only result in a limited food store. But, to be honest, no country leading up to World War I properly prepared to feed their people, let alone their armies. And I think that that's just kind of the result of this misconception that the war is going to be a brief one, which of course it isn't. And above and beyond that, above and beyond the trade, you've got land. Italy desires land. And they want parts of the Southern Alps. They want the port city of Trieste, both of which fall under the jurisdiction of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And Austria-Hungary, they're very reluctant to cede this land. And if they were to, it would have to be contingent on the idea that Italy throws in with them. Meanwhile, on the other side of the aisle, you have the Allies saying, oh, you want that land? We'll give you that land. In fact, how about Albania? You like that? Are you interested in some Turkey? And of course, by saying some Turkey, I'm talking about the Ottoman Empire. I'm not talking about gobble gobble. But you can almost imagine that these heads of state are sitting around the dinner table just carving stuff up, can't you? I mean, I can. But I think something that overshadows all of this, as always, is money. You've got Britain saying to Italy, we'll finance the damn thing for you. We will finance this war. And when the British well runs dry, there's always the United States. And Lord knows, the U.S. is loaning money to the Allies hand over fist. And it's remarkable to watch New York City, in the course of this war, quickly become the banking center of the world, the banking capital of the world, which it does. And in fact, that kind of plays in as another reason why the United States enters the war. I mean, between the U.S. bankers and American politicians, from time to time they find themselves thinking, hey, what if the Allies lose this war? We'd really like our debts repaid, or those debts repaid. And if they lose, we're not getting our money back. So naturally, as always, money is a factor. But of course this video is not about the United States, it's about Italy. And so let's talk more about that. Let's talk about the geological features of fighting in this area. certainly you saw that the trenches, in many cases, are made out of like limestone slabs, and otherwise they might be carved right into the rock. And I don't need to tell you, when an artillery shell hits rock, you've got more than just metal shrapnel flying through the air, and certainly stone is just as deadly. In fact, in terms of using your surroundings as a weapon, all conventional weapons aside, the Austrians notoriously use the environment. There's instances where the Austrians would just roll boulders down onto Italian columns, or they'd use long ropes, and what they would do is they'd kind of like sow through the snow to force an avalanche. And in fact, in December of 1916, in a 48-hour period, 10,000 troops died from avalanches. You know, conventional weapons be damned, 10,000 in a 48-hour period. And one has to admit that this is a beautiful landscape. It really is. I mean, I've not been there personally, but I have read a Smithsonian article recently that features it and has quite a few photos attached. But, and in fact, the thrust of that article was about World War I. It focused on Tofana de Roses. And in fact, more specifically, what was it? The Castelletto, which means little castle. But the Tofana was I'm not an expert at
We have taken
geological terminology, but in layman's terms, the Tofana is a giant mountain with an 1,800-foot peak, and more than halfway down at 700 feet, a blade of rock juts out, and that's the Castelletto. And in spring of 1915, when the Italians declare war, the Central Powers occupy, or have already occupied, the high ground, and the high ground in this area is extremely high ground. The Castelletto is a perfect example of it. It's first occupied by a platoon of Germans, and then they're replaced by a platoon of Austrians, who are ultimately commanded by 19-year-old Hans Schneeberger. Now, this position, the Austrians dig tunnels right up against the cliff face, and then poke out little windows, as it were, that they use as machine gun nests to pour fire down on the Italians below, and they're able to hamper Italian movements. In fact, it's amazing that just a platoon of men are able to stifle the movement of hundreds and hundreds of Italian troops. So much so that Italian High Command, they order the Arditi to dislodge the Austrians from that position. The first attempt is undertaken by 4 Arditi who climb the cliff face in the middle of the night, and an Austrian sentry hears them coming up. And when the first Arditi comes over the cliff's edge, the Austrian opens fire at point-blank range. That lead man falls back, hits his friends on the way down. At sunrise, the Austrians realize that all 4 Arditi have plummeted to their deaths. Next, the Arditi just start tunneling through the Tofana itself. And in some cases, they're using vertical tunnels. They use picks initially and then pneumatic drills. At one juncture, Schneeberger actually goes down into their tunnels with a group of men. He throws one Arditi off the edge, and then he finds a little hatch, and beneath it there's one of these vertical shafts with a rope ladder, and the Arditi are coming up it. Well, he cuts the rope, and they plummet to their deaths. And the Austrians fear one of 3 scenarios: that the Italians will open up a hole above them in the face of the Tofana and fire down on the Castelletto, or that they'll drill right into the Castelletto and just come in shooting or slit their throats in the middle of the night. Or the third, and perhaps most terrifying scenario, they're just rigging the entire thing with explosives, and they'll blow the Austrians right off the mountain. And in fact, the third scenario is what the Arditi is attempting to effect. And so finally, using 35 tons of explosives, the Arditi are ready to blow the mountain. And this is so important to the Italian cause that King Victor Emmanuel himself, along with Luigi Cadorna, they climb an adjacent mountain in order to spectate. And the explosion goes off. There's a massive crater. A lot of Austrians die in the first explosion. This turns into a gunfight. The mountain is just crumbling down onto Italian troops. It's chaos. And somehow, Schneeberger manages to escape with some of the men and get back to the Austrian lines. But, I mean, it's a living hell for everybody involved. And when that thing goes off, I mean, it's just, as you can imagine, it's a massive avalanche. And giant pieces of rock, pieces of the Castelletto continue to fall down. And even now, it's an arduous task for a hiker to get up to that battlefield. But that's the thrust of that article in the Smithsonian. It's written by, what's his name? Brian Balkenhaupt. Wow, he must be, yeah, he's German or something. But anyhow, it's just an unreal scenario, much like we're seeing on screen now. This avalanche that we're seeing, we'll visit the effects of that in the upcoming episodes. Hey, I'm Automatic for Automatic Games. As usual, I appreciate you watching. If you like this video, of course, like this video. And there's more to come, especially concerning the Arditi. So yeah, I will talk to you soon, friends.